Hi, welcome back to TVI Tips from Amanda. We're in part 3 of our series on partnering with paras, and in this video we're going to talk a little bit more about training paraprofessionals and the packet that I give my paraprofessionals, and we might go a little bit into teaching Braille, depending on what the timing looks like when we're working here. So we're in the wrong part of our presentation. We're going to skip forward a little bit here. We've talked about the training document and we finalized our plan. So now we're going to talk about the paraprofessional packet. In the packet that I provide my paraprofessionals, I have a welcome section. And in my welcome section, I include my email and my phone number along with my schedule and when I plan to be working with the student that my paraprofessional is assigned to and when I plan to be providing the training and support for my paraprofessional. I also include my paraprofessional schedule, which as we noticed from our last video includes an hour of time to practice the skills that I'm training, and will include some time for material adaptation and modification, and then supporting the student in the classroom if that's part of my paraprofessional's role. I'll also include the most recent functional vision learning media assessment in the IEP or IEP at a glance, which will include at least the present level of performance, all of the goals, all of the service time, and all of the accommodations. And I will also include in this welcome section any goal sheets for the paraprofessional that I will expect him or her to be using to gather IEP data on. And other service providers can include their data sheets if they'd like it as well. I don't think of the paraprofessional as my paraprofessional, but as the team and the student's paraprofessional, so everyone is able to access the resources that that person has and is able to provide and support as well. So another thing that I include is 19 ways to step back, and there are a lot of different versions of this online. Linking here, I think it's a Word document. I like this version better than the one that's available from NFB, which you can also use, but once this one comes up, if it comes up, it looks like it's not going to come up. It's a Word document and it's a little bit more user friendly as far as the visual appeal of the 19 ways to step back. And when I first meet with a student, we'll talk about this a little bit more, or I'm sorry, when I first meet with the paraprofessional, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next video about how this actually looks when we're implementing it. As I go through line by line the 19 ways to step back, and I reference this frequently with my paraprofessional, especially because I like to include some time in my training support for the paraprofessional to talk about any problems or issues that are arising and ways that I can help support that person. So we often talk about how we can improve independence, and we look at some other tips, which is something that I just recently found. Here it is on the screen, social etiquette suggestions, and it's just another way to reiterate some of those people first phrases, ways that we can interact, and these are available from teachingvisuallyimpaired.com, and you might have to create a login in order to access some of the things that we're sharing today. And then another etiquette thing that I print out comes from visionsupportteam.com, and they have a whole bunch of from NSW government strategies and resources on their website, which are really cool. But just some very simple tips, like when you enter or leave the room, say something that announces your presence, or when you're leaving and avoids embarrassing situations, or make sure the student's aware of any changes to the layout of the classroom. Just little tips that might be useful for someone who's not familiar with working in the blindness field, that we might think comes naturally to us but not to them. And so I like to include these because sometimes I forget things that are natural to me now that aren't for that new paraprofessional. And then finally, I always include an article on hand under hand assistance, and this is the one that I use, Tips for Home or School Hand under Hand Prompting. This was created when talking about students who are deafblind, but I know that the natural tendency for almost every provider who's not familiar with hand under hand is to grab a student's hand and place it on materials, and I never ever 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 want my paraprofessional doing that. So I do provide some training for hand under hand prompting, and I also provide the same handout for all related services, other service providers, and teachers working with my students. So there we go with some of the welcome packet and etiquette information. I am also an O&M specialist, but when I wasn't, or if I'm not the O&M specialist for my paraprofessional and my student, I will invite the O&M to collaborate with my paraprofessional and with me and share any appropriate handouts that they've created or videos that they've created, and to set up a meeting to introduce him or herself and provide any in-person training for my paraprofessional. Next up in my paraprofessional training packet is sectional communication. I really like for there to be a level of collaboration with the administrator who's responsible for my paraprofessional and myself, and to create a chain of command, specifically considering is my paraprofessional going to communicate with parents? If so, what does that look like? How does that paraprofessional relay any problems that might arise with related service providers, or with classroom teachers, or with the student, or with the TVI in particular, and what level steps they have to go through for those issues that come up. I like to make sure that there's this chain of command in place, because things will come up, and I want to make sure that whatever happens has a smooth plan of action. I don't want there to be some level of panic, and sometimes that issues arise when I'm not in the district that day, or maybe I'm out sick, or I'm not available to help deal with that. So we need to have some system in place for communication and then problem solving. And then I do like to include in my paraprofessional training packet a communication log. It's not just for incidents, but anytime my paraprofessional needs to document a situation that comes up, I recommend they keep a log. It's kind of a cover themselves situation, cover everybody's situation, so that everything is well documented. So that's a little bit about communication. It looks different for every paraprofessional in every situation, but we also want to talk a little bit about the Braille section. And so I include a What is Braille handout. We can print this out from APH, or just access the website and share that code, the website address. But this is from their Braille Bug website, which I really like. And I actually have this printout version of it as well. It's more developed for like the children, but I think it's a good way to introduce Braille in a way that's not overwhelming and stressful when we're talking about presenting this paraprofessional packet to a brand new paraprofessional who's never worked in this field. We're going to be talking about eye conditions, we're going to be talking about services and goals and Braille, and you're going to be having to do all this work, and it can be very overwhelming to somebody. So this is a nice low stress way to introduce the Braille to a new paraprofessional, and I will usually separate this out from the packet during my first introduction to Braille and go through it with them, or encourage the paraprofessional to do it with some friends or some children, or share. And I might give multiple copies of the Braille Trail activity booklet, which is something I really like. I also use it when I'm speaking in classes for kids who are learning about Braille as part of their regular curriculum. Then I include a Braille alphabet chart. This is one that I really like. It's from, again, Teaching Visually Impaired. It's nice and clear. It's not overwhelming. The dots are large. Everybody can access that visually pretty easily if vision is their primary means of accessing materials. Not overwhelming. Again, my goal is to not be overwhelming here. I also include a chart with all the contractions. While it's going to take some time for my paraprofessionals to learn the Braille code, I do want them to be using Braille throughout their day, and that might look like taking student work samples and making a copy of it for the paraprofessional to practice transcribing from Braille to print. And so they'll need a quote-unquote cheat sheet to look up the contractions. I really want my paraprofessional to be a problem solver, so I'm going to give them materials to transcribe from Braille to print that are above their current Braille knowledge base, to see if they can use the UEB chart. This is just one example of looking up the contractions and figuring out what the student meant to write in Braille. And then here's another cheat sheet that I also provide. It's a checklist of the Braille contractions. And here we have, again, this is from Teaching Visually Impaired, as was the last one. And this is looking at reading the contraction, obviously visually for a paraprofessional, writing the contraction on a Perkins Brailler, and then understanding the rules for that contraction. So I do provide my paraprofessionals with this so they can kind of see the long-term plan of where we're working with this training, and ultimately what they're going to know by the end of the training in the UEB portion of their Braille learning journey. I do like to include some things on adaptations. Obviously, we're going to train and provide more support in other areas, but this is just like the introduction to their life as a paraprofessional. So I include this really neat thing from Teaching Visually Impaired. It's a document on how to make an enlarged copy on the copier, and it has some beautiful pictures. And so I share this version with paraprofessionals who might be working with a student who's got low vision or is a dual media learner. I don't include this in my Braille copies because obviously Braille readers don't need enlarged print or enlarged copies. And then I have a print comparison sheet for the paraprofessionals who are working with dual media or low vision students. I also share this with classroom teachers because when I do a learning media assessment, I talk about maybe the font size, but I also talk about how large that is. And so I will take this print comparison from Teaching Visually Impaired and highlight the specific one that is appropriate for my dual media or low vision students who are just accessing large print, so they can see which one is appropriate and they compare any materials that they're adapting or providing to my student. Those aren't obviously in every paraprofessional packet. And then I create some information on teaching tactile graphics, and one of the things that I include is this awesome diagram it's a decision tree for how to work with graphics. It's from diagramcenter.org, and then you see the link up at the top, /images/image sorting decision tree _flow.pdf. And so just to go through this graphic really fast, I like it for my paraprofessionals, and I sometimes use it in my own life when I'm like, I don't know if I should do this document or not. But you start with an image and you say, what's the purpose of this image? Is there no purpose? Like, is it just a filler image the teacher included? If so, you follow there's no purpose of this image down, and you don't describe it. You just kind of toss it out the window. If it's an icon, you look at, does that icon prepare or represent a concept for understanding? No, it's just a filler. Then don't describe. Yes, it's important for a concept or understanding, then you would describe it. If it is an image that provides needed information to the student, that the student actually needs that right now, then you have to decide, is that essential information? No. Then you don't describe it. Yes. Then let's ask more questions. So is the text shown with an image? No. Then it's that you would go back to the beginning of the tree. But if it's text shown within an image, yes. Does the text add new information? And if it's yes, then you would probably Braille that out. If it is additional information, is a description adequate? Yes, then you would describe that image. If a text is not adequate, then you might provide a tactile representation. Or it's not adequate, then do you change it? Do you adapt it? Do you modify it? Whatever, to make it accessible to the student. So it looks overwhelming, but it's just a nice decision tree to help your paraprofessional decide if they're going to toss the image or icon out the window, if they're going to provide a Braille or verbal description of the image, or if they're going to provide a tactile description, tactile graphic or chart or whatever of the image that you see. And so we have concluded our section on the Para Packet. And the next video is going to talk a little bit about, it's actually going to talk in depth about teaching Braille and providing that training to paras. We're already at about 14 minutes for this video, so I'm going to separate the Braille video into a fourth segment. And I hope you're finding these videos helpful and useful in your journey of progress monitoring and teaching and training a paraprofessional. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it off.